They say eavesdropping never leads to anything good, but sometimes it leads to everything you need to know. My name is Emily Morrison, and at 72 years old, I thought I knew exactly who I was in my family's eyes. I was wrong. Dead wrong. What I discovered 3 months ago changed not just how I saw my son and his wife, but how I saw myself. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. It started with a phone call I wasn't supposed to hear, and ended with me reclaiming a life I didn't even know I'd lost. The morning that changed everything started like any other Tuesday in Riverside. I was tending to my roses in the backyard, the California sun warming my shoulders as I deadheaded the blooms Edmund had planted for me 15 years ago. The garden was my sanctuary, the one place where I felt truly useful since my arthritis had made most household tasks a struggle. My hands weren't what they used to be, but they could still coax beauty from the soil. I'd been living alone in our ranch-style home for 3 years now, ever since Edmund passed from complications after his surgery. The house felt too big sometimes, too quiet, but it held 40 years of memories I wasn't ready to abandon. David, my only child, had been pressuring me to move somewhere smaller, somewhere with assistance nearby. He meant well, I thought. A son worrying about his aging mother was natural, wasn't it? The arthritis had been getting worse, that much was true. Some mornings I could barely grip my coffee cup, and the pain in my joints made simple tasks like opening jars or reaching high shelves nearly impossible. I'd started using a walking stick on bad days, though I hated admitting I needed it. David and his wife Jessica knew about my struggles. I'd been honest about the pain, about the days when I felt like my body was betraying me bit by bit. Jessica had been particularly attentive lately, which surprised me. She'd never been warm toward me, not in the 8 years since she'd married David. There was always a coolness there, a distance I'd attributed to generational differences or maybe just personality conflicts. But recently, she'd been calling more often, asking how I was feeling, whether I needed help with groceries or doctor appointments. I'd been touched by what seemed like genuine concern. My granddaughter, Sophia, was my bright spot in all of this. At 14, she was the kind of kid who still wanted to spend time with her grandmother, still listened to my stories about the old days, and shared her dreams about becoming a marine biologist. She'd come over after school sometimes, helping me in the garden or just sitting on the porch talking about her classes, her friends, her plans for the future. Those conversations were what kept me going on the hardest days. That Tuesday morning, I was struggling with a particularly stubborn rosebush when I heard David's car pull into the driveway. I wasn't expecting him. He usually called first, and it was only 10 in the morning. Too early for his lunch break, too late for a quick stop before work. I heard car doors slam, then voices. Multiple voices. Jessica was with him, and they seemed to be having an intense conversation. I stayed in the backyard, not wanting to interrupt if they were in the middle of something important. From where I knelt by the roses, I could hear them clearly through the kitchen window, which I'd left open to let in the morning breeze. What I heard made my blood run cold. The doctor said her mobility is only going to get worse, David was saying. The arthritis is progressing faster than expected. She can barely handle the basics anymore. How much longer do you think we have to wait? Jessica's voice carried a tone I'd never heard before. Impatient. Calculating. That old one is still alive, and frankly, David, I'm getting tired of pretending to care about her aches and pains every week. I froze, my pruning shears halfway to a dead bloom. That old one, she was talking about me. Her mother-in-law. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The woman who'd welcomed her into the family, who'd helped plan her wedding, who'd babysat Sophia countless times when they needed a night out. Jessica, keep your voice down, David said, but he didn't sound angry. He sounded worried about being overheard, not about what she'd said. Why? She can barely hear us anyway with those windows closed, and even if she could, what's she going to do? Hobble after us with that walking stick? They both laughed. Actually laughed. At my expense, at my pain, at my limitations. Look, Jessica continued, I know she's your mother, but we've been patient long enough. The house is worth, what, $400,000 now? maybe more with the market the way it is. That's our kids' college fund sitting there, rotting away with some stubborn old woman who refuses to see reason. Our kids' college fund. Sophia was their only child. They were talking about my home, my sanctuary, my life like it was already theirs. I've been working on her, David said. Talking about how dangerous it is for her to live alone, how much easier it would be in assisted living. But you know how she is. Stubborn as a mule. Well, maybe it's time to stop asking and start telling, Jessica replied. Dr. Peterson said her condition is only going to deteriorate. We could get a medical assessment, show that she's not capable of living independently anymore. Then it's not really her choice, is it? My heart was pounding so hard I was sure they'd hear it through the window. They were planning to have me declared incompetent. They were planning to take my home, my independence, my life, and package it up as concern for my welfare. I don't know, Jess. That seems pretty extreme. Extreme? David, we've been carrying this burden for 3 years. 3 years of Sunday dinners, where we have to pretend we care about her garden and her stories about your father. 3 years of phone calls about every little ache and pain. 3 years of our lives on hold because that old one is still alive and still clinging to a house she can't even maintain properly. There was that phrase again. That old one is still alive. Like I was an inconvenience, a problem to be solved. A life that had outlived its usefulness. The Hendersons put their mother in Sunny Acres last year, Jessica went on. She fought it at first, but now she seems happy enough. They have activities, other people her age. Emily would probably be better off there anyway. Better off. They were convincing themselves that stealing my life was actually a kindness. And the money from the house? David asked, would finally let us breathe. Pay off the credit cards, fix the roof, maybe even take that vacation to Europe we've been talking about for years. Sophia could do that summer program in France she's been wanting. We could actually live instead of just surviving paycheck to paycheck. I'd had no idea they were struggling financially. David had a good job at the insurance company, and Jessica worked part-time at a medical office. They lived in a nice neighborhood, drove decent cars, always seemed comfortable. But apparently, they'd been looking at my home as their salvation for years. I still think we should try the gentle approach first, David said. Maybe get Dr. Martinez to talk to her about the benefits of assisted living, come at it from a health angle. Dr. Martinez was my primary care physician, a kind man in his 50s who'd been treating me since Edmund died. I trusted him completely. The thought that they might try to manipulate him into supporting their scheme made me sick. Fine, Jessica sighed. But if the gentle approach doesn't work, we go with Plan B. I'm not waiting until I'm 50 to finally have the life I want because your mother is too selfish to see the bigger picture. Too selfish. I was too selfish for wanting to live in my own home, for wanting to maintain what little independence I had left. They started moving toward the front door, and I realized they hadn't come to see me at all. They'd come to discuss me, to plan my future without my input, using my own driveway as their meeting place because they thought I was too deaf and too weak to notice. I stayed hidden behind the rose bushes until I heard their car pull away, then I sat down hard on the garden bench, my hands shaking. Not from arthritis this time, but from shock and betrayal that cut deeper than any physical pain I'd ever experienced. That old one is still alive. The words echoed in my head like a curse. To Jessica, I wasn't Emily Morrison, devoted wife, loving mother, proud grandmother. I wasn't a person with feelings, dreams, fears, hopes. I was an obstacle standing between her and the life she felt she deserved. And David, my own son, whom I'd raised alone after his father left when he was just 12. David, who I'd worked double shifts to put through college. David, who'd promised me at Edmund's funeral that he'd always be there for me. He was going along with this plan, maybe even encouraging it. I sat in that garden for 2 hours, trying to process what I'd heard. The arthritis pain in my hands seemed insignificant compared to the ache in my chest. How long had they been talking about me this way? How many family dinners had I sat through, smiling and grateful for their company, while they counted down the days until they could ship me off somewhere and claim their inheritance. And Sophia? Did she know? Was my granddaughter, the light of my life, in on this too? The thought made me physically ill. By the time I finally went inside, I'd made a decision. I wasn't going to confront them. Not yet. I was going to do something they'd never expect from that old one who was still alive. I was going to fight back. But first, I needed to know exactly what I was up against. I'd spent 50 years as a bookkeeper before I retired. I knew how to organize information, how to track details, how to build a case. If David and Jessica thought they could manipulate me because of my arthritis and my age, they were about to learn just how wrong they were. I started that very afternoon. I called Dr. Martinez's office and scheduled a comprehensive checkup, telling his nurse I wanted a complete evaluation of my physical and mental capabilities. I also asked for copies of all my medical records. If they were planning to use my health against me, I needed to know exactly what ammunition they might have. Next, I called my bank and requested a meeting with my financial advisor. I wanted to review all my accounts, my will, any legal documents that might affect my independence. If there were vulnerabilities in my financial situation, I needed to identify them before David and Jessica could exploit them. The most difficult call was to my old friend Margaret, a retired attorney who'd helped Edmund and me with legal matters over the years. Margaret and I had drifted apart since Edmund's death, mainly because I'd been so focused on managing my arthritis and my grief that I'd let many friendships slide. But if anyone could help me understand my legal rights and options, it was Margaret. "Emily," she said when she heard my voice, "what a wonderful surprise. How are you holding up, dear?" "I'm fine, Margaret. Better than fine, actually. But I need some legal advice, and I was hoping you might be willing to help an old friend." "Of course. What's going on?" I gave her a carefully edited version of what I'd overheard, focusing on the legal implications rather than the emotional devastation. Margaret listened without interrupting, but I could hear her sharp intake of breath when I mentioned their plan to have me declared incompetent. "Emily, what they're discussing could constitute elder abuse if they follow through with it. Financial exploitation, emotional manipulation, potentially even fraud if they try to influence medical opinions. You absolutely need to protect yourself." "That's what I was hoping you'd say. Can we meet?" "I'd rather discuss this in person." "Absolutely. How about Thursday afternoon?" "I'll clear my schedule." After I hung up with Margaret, I sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad and started making lists. Everything I could remember about David and Jessica's recent behavior. Questions I needed to ask. Steps I needed to take. For the first time since Edmund died, I felt like I had a purpose beyond just getting through each day. The arthritis pain was still there, still limiting what I could do physically. But my mind was sharper than it had been in years. That old one was still alive, all right. And she was about to remind them exactly what that meant. Over the next few days, I watched David and Jessica more carefully during their visits. Now that I knew what to look for, I could see the calculation behind Jessica's newfound concern. The way she assessed the house when she thought I wasn't looking, mentally cataloging the antiques and valuables. The way David steered conversations toward my health problems, always emphasizing how difficult things had become for me. I also paid attention to Sophia during her after-school visits. Relief flooded through me when I realized she had no idea what her parents were planning. She was genuinely concerned about my arthritis, genuinely interested in spending time with me. She talked about her plans for high school next year, about the marine biology program at UC San Diego that she was already dreaming about. She was innocent in all this, which made her parents' betrayal even more painful, but also gave me something precious to protect. Thursday's meeting with Margaret was eye-opening in ways I hadn't expected. She explained exactly how elder abuse cases worked, how difficult it could be to prove, but how devastating the consequences were for families when the truth came out. "The key thing you have going for you, Emily, is that you're being proactive," she said as we sat in her office downtown. "You're not waiting until they make their move. You're gathering information and building defenses while you still have full control over your situation." "What kind of defenses?" "Well, first we make sure your medical records clearly document your mental competency. Dr. Martinez's evaluation will be crucial for that. Second, we review and possibly update your will and other legal documents to make sure they accurately reflect your wishes. Third, we consider setting up protective measures for your assets. Margaret pulled out a thick folder. I've been doing some research since you called. There are several legal structures we could use to protect your house, and savings from manipulation. A revocable living trust, for instance, would give you complete control during your lifetime, but make it much harder for anyone to challenge your decisions. And if they try to have me declared incompetent anyway? That's where having current medical evaluations becomes crucial. But Emily, I have to ask, are you sure about what you heard? Could there have been any misunderstanding? I thought about Jessica's words, the coldness in her voice, the casual way she'd referred to me as a burden. No misunderstanding, Margaret. I heard what I heard. Then we need to be prepared for them to escalate their efforts. In my experience, when people are planning this kind of manipulation, they don't just give up when their first approach doesn't work. They usually get more aggressive. Margaret was right. Over the next week, I noticed a definite shift in David and Jessica's behavior. David started bringing up my health problems more frequently, always in front of witnesses. When we were at the grocery store together and I had trouble reaching something on a high shelf, he made a point of mentioning it loudly to the clerk. When I fumbled with my keys at the front door, he exchanged meaningful glances with Jessica and suggested maybe it was time to consider giving him a spare set. Jessica's approach was more subtle, but equally calculated. She started bringing up stories about other elderly people she'd heard about, always focusing on accidents, falls, emergencies, where the person had been alone and unable to get help. She'd shake her head sadly and comment on how dangerous it was for older people to live by themselves, especially with mobility issues. They were building a narrative, creating a paper trail of my supposed incompetence and vulnerability. Every stumble, every moment of forgetfulness, every sign of my arthritis was being documented and exaggerated for future use. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They assumed I was as helpless as I appeared. They saw an elderly woman with arthritis and made the same error that predators always make. They confused physical limitations with mental weakness. The truth was, my mind had never been clearer. The shock of their betrayal had burned away the fog of grief and depression that had clouded my thinking since Edmund's death. For the first time in 3 years, I felt truly awake, truly alive, truly myself. Dr. Martinez's evaluation confirmed what I already knew. Yes, I had arthritis. Yes, it limited my mobility and caused daily pain. But I was mentally sharp, emotionally stable, and perfectly capable of making my own decisions about my life and my future. Mrs. Morrison, he said during our appointment, I've reviewed all your test results, and while your arthritis is progressing, there's absolutely nothing here that would suggest you're incapable of independent living. Your cognitive function is excellent. Your judgment seems sound. You're managing your condition well, and you're staying active and engaged. Would you be willing to put that in writing, Dr. Martinez? He looked puzzled. Is there some reason you need an official assessment? I chose my words carefully. I want to make sure I have proper documentation of my capabilities, just in case questions arise in the future. Of course. I'll have my nurse prepare a comprehensive report for you. That report became the cornerstone of my defense strategy. Margaret used it to draft what she called a, quote, declaration of competency, a legal document that would make it extremely difficult for anyone to challenge my mental capacity without overwhelming evidence to the contrary. We also set up the revocable living trust, transferring ownership of my house and most of my assets into a legal structure that I controlled completely, but that would be much harder for David and Jessica to attack. The trust named Sophia as the primary beneficiary, with specific provisions for her education and future. David and Jessica were not mentioned anywhere in the new documents. Emily, Margaret said as we finished the paperwork, I have to ask one more time. Are you sure you want to exclude David entirely? He is your son, regardless of what he's planning. I thought about the little boy who used to help me plant flowers in the backyard, who'd bring me drawings from school, who'd curl up next to me on the couch for bedtime stories. Then I thought about the man who'd stood in my driveway and agreed that his mother was a burden to be disposed of. He made his choice, Margaret. Now I'm making mine. The final piece of my strategy was the hardest emotionally but the most important practically. I needed to know exactly how far David and Jessica were willing to go with their plan. I needed them to show their hand completely before I showed mine. So I started playing a role. I began acting more confused, more helpless, more dependent. I'd ask David to repeat things, as if I hadn't heard him clearly. I'd seem uncertain about dates and appointments. I'd mention feeling overwhelmed by managing the house, by handling my finances, by making decisions about my health care. It felt like betraying myself, pretending to be the frail, incompetent old woman they wanted me to be. But it was necessary. I needed them to feel confident enough in their plan to move forward with it. I needed to catch them in the act of trying to manipulate my life. The performance worked better than I'd hoped. Within 2 weeks, David was suggesting that maybe I needed help managing my medications. Jessica was recommending a financial advisor who could simplify my banking and investment accounts. They even arranged for a social worker to visit, ostensibly to assess what kind of support services might be helpful for someone in my situation. I played along with all of it, asking confused questions, expressing gratitude for their concern, appearing overwhelmed by the complexity of adult responsibilities. Inside, I was documenting everything, recording conversations when possible, taking notes on every suggestion and recommendation. Margaret was impressed by the evidence I was gathering. Emily, they're making this almost too easy for us. Every step they're taking to manipulate you is another piece of evidence we can use to expose their real motives. I just hope I can keep this up long enough to get what we need, I admitted. It's exhausting, pretending to be helpless when every instinct is telling me to fight back. Soon, Margaret promised. We're almost ready to turn the tables on them. The breakthrough came 3 weeks later, during what I thought was just another family dinner. David and Jessica had been especially attentive that evening, asking detailed questions about my daily routine, my energy levels, my ability to handle household tasks. I'd played my part perfectly, admitting to struggles I wasn't really having, expressing doubts about my ability to continue living alone. After dinner, Sophia went upstairs to do homework, and I excused myself to the bathroom. But instead of going to the downstairs bathroom, I quietly climbed the stairs to use the one near Sophia's room. As I passed her door, I could hear David and Jessica talking in low voices in the kitchen below. What I heard made everything crystal clear. "She's deteriorating faster than I expected," Jessica was saying. "Did you hear how confused she sounded about her bank statements? And she forgot she had a doctor's appointment yesterday." I hadn't forgotten anything. I'd been testing them, seeing how they'd react to signs of cognitive decline. "Dr. Peterson thinks we have a strong case for conservatorship," David replied, "especially with the social worker's report." Emily admitted to him that she feels overwhelmed by financial decisions. "Because you coached me to say that," I thought bitterly. "How long before we can move forward?" Jessica asked. "Peterson says we could file the paperwork next week. Once we have conservatorship, we can make decisions about her living situation, her finances, everything. She won't have any say in it." "And the house?" "Will have to be sold to pay for her care, of course. It's too much for her to handle anyway. She'll be much better off at Sunny Acres." Sunny Acres. I knew that place. It was a nursing home on the outskirts of town. Not the worst facility, but not exactly where someone would choose to spend their final years. "God, I can't wait to get this over with," Jessica said. "I'm so tired of pretending to care about every little complaint and medical update. That old one has been hanging on forever, and frankly, I'll be relieved when she's finally someone else's problem." There it was again, that phrase that had started it all. That old one is still alive, and Jessica couldn't wait for that to change. "Once this is settled, we can finally start living our real life," David agreed. "The life we should have had years ago." I'd heard enough. More than enough. I quietly made my way back downstairs, my mind racing with plans and possibilities. They thought they were so close to victory, so close to getting everything they wanted. They had no idea that every word they'd just spoken had been overheard by that old one who is still very much alive and finally ready to fight back. The next morning, I called Margaret and told her everything. It was time to stop gathering evidence and start using it. It was time to show David and Jessica exactly what happened when you underestimated a woman who'd survived 72 years of life's challenges and learned something from each one. That old one was still alive, all right. And she was about to remind them exactly why that was their problem, not her burden. Margaret's office felt different this time when I walked in on Friday morning. The comfortable leather chairs and wall-to-wall law books that had once seemed reassuring now felt like weapons in an arsenal I was finally ready to use. My friend looked up from her desk as her secretary showed me in, and I could see the concern in her eyes. "Emily, you sounded urgent on the phone. What happened?" I settled into the chair across from her desk, my walking stick propped against the armrest. The arthritis was acting up today, probably from the stress, but my mind was razor sharp. "They're moving faster than we thought. David mentioned filing conservatorship papers next week." Margaret's expression hardened. She'd been practicing elder law for 30 years, and she'd seen every trick in the book when it came to family members trying to exploit their elderly relatives. "Tell me everything." I recounted the conversation I'd overheard the night before, watching Margaret's face grow more serious with each detail. When I mentioned Dr. Peterson, she grabbed a pen and started taking notes. "Who exactly is Dr. Peterson?" "You've never mentioned him before." "That's because I've never heard of him," I replied. "David claimed this doctor thinks they have a strong case for conservatorship, but I've never been evaluated by anyone named Peterson. My primary care physician is Dr. Martinez, and he just gave me a clean bill of mental health 3 weeks ago." Margaret's pen stopped moving. "Emily, if they're claiming medical opinions from a doctor you've never seen, that's fraud. Pure and simple. What do we do about it?" "First, we document everything. I want you to start keeping a detailed diary of every interaction with David and Jessica. Dates, times, exact conversations. Second, we need to find out who this Dr. Peterson is, and whether he actually exists in the capacity they're claiming." She leaned back in her chair, her fingers steepled in front of her face. It was a gesture I remembered from the old days when she was working through a particularly complex case. "Emily, I think it's time we went on the offensive. What would you say to setting a trap for them?" The word trap sent a thrill through me that I hadn't expected. After weeks of feeling like prey, the idea of becoming the hunter was intoxicating. "What kind of trap?" "We're going to give them exactly what they think they want. You're going to continue playing the confused, helpless, elderly woman, but we're going to control the narrative. We'll feed them information that leads them to make mistakes, to expose themselves completely." Margaret opened her laptop and started typing. "I'm going to do some research on conservatorship fraud cases. There are specific patterns these schemes follow, and if David and Jessica are following the playbook, we can anticipate their next moves and be ready for them." I spent the next hour with Margaret, planning what she called a controlled deterioration. I would gradually appear to become more confused, more dependent, more in need of help, but every symptom would be carefully documented as an act, and every response from David and Jessica would be recorded as evidence of their manipulation. "The key is to make them overconfident," Margaret explained. "Predators get sloppy when they think their victim is completely helpless. They'll start taking bigger risks, making bigger mistakes." When I left Margaret's office that afternoon, I had a clear mission. I was going to become the best actress Riverside had ever seen, and my performance was going to save my life. The first test came that very evening when David called to check on me. I'd been expecting the call. Ever since I'd started acting more confused, he'd been calling daily, always asking the same questions about my medications, my meals, my daily activities. "Hi, Mom, how are you feeling today?" I let a slight tremor creep into my voice. "Oh, David, I'm a little confused today. I couldn't remember if I'd taken my morning pills, so I took them again just to be safe. But now I'm worried I might have taken too many." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. "Mom, that's dangerous. You can't double dose your arthritis medication. Do you feel nauseous? Dizzy?" "A little dizzy, yes. And I had trouble remembering Mrs. Chen's name when she stopped by earlier. You know, the neighbor from across the street? I've known her for 15 years, but for a moment I just couldn't place her." Mrs. Chen had indeed stopped by, and I'd had no trouble remembering her name or having a perfectly normal conversation about her new grandchild. But David didn't need to know that. "Mom, I'm coming over." "Oh, you don't need to do that, dear. I'm sure I'll be fine. No, I'll be there in 20 minutes. Don't take any more medication until I get there, okay?" I hung up the phone and immediately called Margaret on the secure line we'd established. Phase 1 is in motion. David's coming over because I told him I accidentally double-dosed my medication. Perfect. Remember, you're confused but not hostile. Grateful for his help, but clearly struggling to manage basic tasks. And Emily? Be careful not to overact. The best lies are mostly truth, with just enough fiction to serve your purpose. When David arrived, I was sitting in my living room chair, looking appropriately bewildered. I'd actually taken my normal medication at the normal time, but I'd practiced looking slightly disoriented in the bathroom mirror. "Mom, show me your pill organizer." I led him to the kitchen, moving slowly and deliberately, using my walking stick more dramatically than usual. The pill organizer was exactly as it should be, because I hadn't actually taken extra medication, but I peered at it with apparent confusion. I thought I'd already taken these this morning, but maybe I was thinking of yesterday? The days seem to run together sometimes. David examined the organizer carefully, and I could see him making mental notes. "Mom, this is exactly why we've been worried about you. Medication errors can be really serious, especially at your age." "I know, dear, I just get so mixed up sometimes. Maybe I should write things down, but then I forget where I put the paper." I let out a small, helpless laugh. "Maybe it would be better if someone else managed your medications for a while. Just until you're feeling more clear-headed." There it was, the first concrete step toward taking control of my daily life. "Oh, I don't know. I've been managing my own pills for 70 years. "But Mom, you've never been 72 with advancing arthritis and living alone. Things change. It's okay to accept help." I pretended to consider this, letting uncertainty play across my face. "I suppose if you think it's best. You're the one with the insurance background. You understand these medical things better than I do." The relief in David's expression was unmistakable. He thought he was making progress, gaining ground in his campaign to prove I couldn't live independently. What he was actually doing was providing me with evidence of his manipulation tactics. After he left, promising to pick up a more sophisticated pill organizer the next day, I immediately wrote down every detail of our conversation in the journal Margaret had given me. The time, the date, exactly what I'd said, and exactly how he'd responded. His eagerness to take control of my medication management. His assumption that my age automatically made me incompetent. The next morning, I called Dr. Martinez's office and scheduled another appointment. When his nurse asked if there was a specific concern, I told her I wanted to discuss medication management and my cognitive function. If David was going to use my supposed medication confusion as evidence of incompetence, I needed medical documentation of my actual mental state. Dr. Martinez was puzzled when I explained my request. "Mrs. Morrison, we just did a comprehensive evaluation 3 weeks ago. Has something changed?" "Doctor, I need you to document very clearly that I'm fully capable of managing my own medications and making my own medical decisions. Can you do that for me?" "Of course, but why the urgency? Is someone questioning your competency?" I chose my words carefully. "Let's just say I want to make sure there's no ambiguity about my mental state in my medical records." Dr. Martinez conducted another series of cognitive tests, all of which I passed easily. He also reviewed my medication regimen and confirmed that I had been taking everything correctly and on schedule. Most importantly, he documented in my chart that I showed no signs of dementia, confusion, or inability to manage my own care. "Mrs. Morrison, I hope you know that if anyone ever questions your mental capacity, they'll have to deal with my medical opinion first. And my opinion is that you're as sharp as anyone half your age." Armed with this fresh medical documentation, I felt ready for the next phase of Margaret's plan. I was going to start making small mistakes that would alarm David and Jessica enough to accelerate their timeline, but I was going to make sure every mistake was documented as deliberate acting rather than actual cognitive decline. The opportunity came sooner than expected. David called that afternoon to tell me he'd picked up the new pill organizer and wanted to come by to set it up. I told him I'd had a difficult morning, that I'd gotten confused trying to balance my checkbook and had given up in frustration. "The numbers just don't seem to make sense anymore," I said, letting worry creep into my voice. I used to be so good with money, but now it all seems overwhelming. This was a complete lie. I'd balanced my checkbook perfectly that morning, as I did every month. My finances were in excellent order, and I knew exactly where every penny was. But David didn't know that. "Mom, financial confusion can be a sign of cognitive decline. Maybe it would be better if I helped you with your banking for a while." "Oh, I hate to be a burden, but if you think it's necessary..." "It's not a burden, Mom. It's what families do for each other." Families. The word tasted bitter in my mouth. Real families didn't conspire to steal from their elderly members. Real families didn't refer to their mothers as burdens to be disposed of. When David arrived with the pill organizer, I had my checkbook and bank statements spread across the kitchen table in apparent disarray. I'd actually organized them very deliberately to look like the work of someone who was struggling with basic math, but I'd made photocopies of everything in their correct state first. "See, David? I was trying to reconcile last month's statement, but the numbers just don't add up. I must have made an error somewhere, but I can't figure out where." David sat down at the table and began examining my work. I watched his face carefully as he looked at the fabricated mistakes I'd planted. He was trying to look concerned, but I could see satisfaction in his eyes. Every error, every sign of confusion was validation of his plan. "Mom, these calculations are pretty far off. You've got some deposits recorded as withdrawals, and you've miscalculated several balances." I'd done no such thing in real life, but the fake version I'd created for his benefit showed exactly those errors. "I just can't seem to keep things straight anymore. Maybe you're right about needing help with financial matters. Let me take this home and sort it out for you. I'll make sure everything balances correctly. Would you?" That would be such a relief. As I handed him the deliberately confused paperwork, I realized how easy it would be for him to manipulate my actual finances if I were genuinely struggling with cognitive issues. The thought made me both angry and grateful. Angry that my own son would exploit such vulnerabilities, but grateful that I was sharp enough to protect myself. After David left, I called Margaret to report on the day's performance. He took the bait completely. He now has what he thinks is evidence of financial confusion, and he's offered to take over managing my banking. Excellent. Now we wait and see how quickly he moves to formalize that arrangement. My guess is he'll suggest setting up automatic bill pay, joint accounts, maybe even a financial power of attorney within the next week or two. Margaret was right. 3 days later, David called to suggest we meet with my bank's financial advisor to discuss simplifying my banking arrangements. He'd already made an appointment for Friday afternoon. "I've been thinking about what you said, Mom, about the numbers being confusing. There are ways to automate most of your financial management so you don't have to worry about balancing checkbooks or remembering due dates for bills." "That sounds wonderful, dear. I've been so stressed about money matters lately." What David didn't know was that I'd already met with my bank's financial advisor, a sharp woman named Linda Chen, who understood exactly what I was dealing with. Linda had helped me set up additional security measures on all my accounts, including verbal passwords that only I knew, and alerts for any attempts to add authorized users or make significant changes. "Mrs. Morrison," Linda had explained during our private meeting, "unfortunately, financial elder abuse by family members is more common than people realize. We've put flags on your accounts that will require your physical presence and additional verification for any major changes. If someone tries to pressure you into signing documents you're not comfortable with, just ask to reschedule the meeting and call me immediately." So when Friday arrived and I walked into the bank with David, I was prepared for whatever he might try to accomplish. Linda greeted us professionally, giving no sign that she and I had already discussed the situation in detail. "Mr. Morrison, your mother mentioned that she's been having some difficulty managing her financial tasks lately. What specifically are you hoping to accomplish today? David launched into his prepared speech about my supposed confusion with checkbook balancing and bill paying. He suggested setting up automatic payments for all my regular expenses and adding him as an authorized user on my accounts so he could monitor for any problems. That sounds very thoughtful, Linda replied. Mrs. Morrison, how do you feel about these suggestions? I played my part perfectly, looking uncertain and overwhelmed. I just want to make sure I don't make any more mistakes with the numbers. But I've been managing my own money for so long, it feels strange to give up control. Of course it does, Linda said kindly. These are big decisions. Why don't we start with something smaller? We could set up automatic payment for just 1 or 2 of your regular bills, see how that feels, and then gradually add others if you're comfortable. David looked frustrated by this measured approach. I think it would be more efficient to handle everything at once. Mom's already stressed about financial management, and dragging this out will just make it worse for her. I understand your concern, Linda replied, but Mrs. Morrison is our client, and we always want to make sure any changes are made at a pace she's comfortable with. These decisions affect her daily life, after all. I could see David struggling with how to push harder without seeming manipulative in front of a bank employee. Mom, don't you think it would be easier to just get everything set up today? Then you won't have to worry about any of it anymore. The phrase, won't have to worry about any of it anymore, sent chills down my spine. Once I gave up control of my finances, I really wouldn't have to worry about them, because I wouldn't have any power over them. I think Linda's suggestion sounds reasonable, I said, appearing to consider the options carefully. Maybe we could start with just the electric bill and see how that works? David's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but he nodded. If that's what you're comfortable with, Mom. We set up automatic payment for my electric bill only, a harmless arrangement that gave David the illusion of progress while actually accomplishing nothing toward his real goal. As we left the bank, I could feel his frustration radiating off him like heat. That wasn't very efficient, Mom. We could have taken care of everything today. I know, dear, but it all seems so overwhelming. Maybe next time we can do a few more bills. Next time was never going to come, but David didn't need to know that yet. That evening, Sophia called to chat about her day at school. These conversations had become precious to me, not just because I loved my granddaughter, but because they were genuine. With Sophia, I didn't have to act or pretend or calculate every word. I could just be myself. Grandma, are you okay? Dad said you've been having trouble with some things lately. My heart sank. They were already starting to plant seeds of doubt about my competency with Sophia. What kind of trouble, sweetheart? He said you've been confused about your medications and having problems with math. He's worried about you living alone. I took a deep breath, knowing I had to be very careful here. Sophia was innocent, but she was also the key to everything. If David and Jessica could convince her that I was declining mentally, they could use her concern as additional evidence for their conservatorship case. I've been having some difficulties with my arthritis, I said carefully. Some days the pain makes it hard to concentrate, and I make silly mistakes. But my mind is fine, Sophia. I promise you that. I know, Grandma. You don't seem confused when we talk. You remember everything about my school projects and my friends' names and all the stories I tell you. Smart girl. She was already noticing the inconsistency between my supposed cognitive decline and my actual behavior with her. Sophia, can I ask you something? Have your parents been talking about me a lot lately? About my health? Or my living situation? There was a pause, and I could hear the television in the background of wherever she was calling from. Sometimes, Mom says she's worried about you, and Dad talks about maybe finding you a place where there are people to help you if you need it. A place where there are people to help you. What a beautiful euphemism for a nursing home. How do you feel about that idea, sweetheart? I don't want you to move away from your house, she said immediately. I love coming over after school and working in the garden with you, and you always remember to make my favorite snacks, and you help me with my homework. If you moved to one of those places, I probably wouldn't see you as much. You'd always see me, Sophia. No matter where I lived, you'd always be welcome. But it wouldn't be the same. Your house is special. It's where all our good memories are. This 14-year-old girl understood what her father had forgotten. Home wasn't just a financial asset. It was the repository of a lifetime's worth of love, loss, joy, and sorrow. It was the place where Edmund and I had built our life together, where David had grown up, where Sophia had learned to garden and bake cookies and feel unconditionally loved. "Grandma, can I tell you a secret?" "Of course, sweetheart." "I heard Mom and Dad arguing about money the other night. Mom said something about how much easier things would be once you moved to that place. It made me feel weird, like they were happy about you going away." My heart broke a little. Sophia was starting to see her parents' true motives, and I hated that she had to lose her innocence about the people who were supposed to protect her. Adults sometimes say things they don't mean when they're stressed, honey. Your parents love you very much, and they love me too, in their own way. I guess. But Grandma, if they try to make you move somewhere you don't want to go, will you fight them? The question surprised me with its directness. What makes you ask that? Because you're the strongest person I know. You took care of Dad when Grandpa Edmund got sick. You worked all those years to support your family. You learned how to live alone after Grandpa died. You're not the kind of person who just gives up. Out of the mouths of babes. Sophia saw me more clearly than my own son did. She saw strength where David saw weakness, independence where he saw burden, resilience where he saw decline. I promise you, Sophia, I will never give up. And I will never let anyone make decisions about my life without my consent. Good. Because I need you to stay strong, Grandma. You're like my anchor, you know? When everything else gets crazy, I know I can always come to your house and feel safe. After we hung up, I sat in Edmund's old chair and thought about anchors. Sophia had chosen her metaphor perfectly. An anchor keeps a ship from drifting, provides stability in rough waters, holds steady against currents that would otherwise sweep everything away. That's what I'd always tried to be for my family. And that's what I needed to continue being, even if some members of that family no longer appreciated the service. The weekend brought an unexpected development. Jessica called on Saturday morning to suggest she take me shopping for groceries and household supplies. This was unusual. David was typically the one who handled errands with me, while Jessica maintained her distance. "I thought it might be nice for us to spend some girl time together," she said with artificial warmth. "Plus, I know navigating the grocery store can be challenging with your arthritis." I agreed to the shopping trip, curious about what Jessica might be planning. Margaret had warned me that manipulators often escalated their tactics when they felt time pressure, and the conservatorship timeline David had mentioned was approaching quickly. Jessica picked me up in her silver sedan, chattering pleasantly about the weather and Sophia's school activities. But I could sense an underlying tension in her voice, a forced quality to her cheerfulness that reminded me of a saleswoman trying too hard to close a deal. The grocery store was busy for a Saturday morning, filled with families doing their weekly shopping. Jessica insisted on getting a cart and steering it herself while I walked alongside with my walking stick. "Emily, why don't you tell me what you need, and I'll handle the reaching and lifting. Save your joints." It was a reasonable offer, and under normal circumstances I might have appreciated the help. But I could see Jessica's eyes cataloging every item I had difficulty reaching, every moment when I needed to rest, every sign that grocery shopping was becoming challenging for me. At the pharmacy counter, she encouraged me to pick up all my prescriptions at once. It would be so much more efficient than making multiple trips, don't you think? I suppose, but I usually just get them one at a time as I run out. But Emily, that means you're making extra trips when you're not feeling well. Wouldn't it be easier to have them all synchronized so David or I could pick them up for you? There it was. Another small step toward dependence, framed as convenience and concern. If Jessica was managing my prescription pickups, it would be easier for them to monitor my medication usage and potentially control it. "I'll think about it," I said, playing confused and uncertain. We were in the canned goods aisle when Jessica made her real move. She'd positioned us in a section where there were several other shoppers nearby, including a woman I recognized from my neighborhood. "Emily, can you reach that tomato sauce on the top shelf?" Jessica asked, pointing to a can that was clearly beyond my reach even on a good day. I stretched up with my free hand, balancing carefully on my walking stick, knowing I wouldn't be able to reach it. Jessica made no move to help, just watched as I struggled and clearly became frustrated. "I can't quite reach it. I said, lowering my arm. "Oh dear," Jessica said loudly enough for nearby shoppers to hear. "Emily, this is exactly what David and I have been worried about. You're going to hurt yourself trying to reach things you can't manage anymore." The neighbor I'd recognized, Mrs. Patterson from 2 streets over, turned to look at us with obvious concern. Jessica gave her a meaningful look. "We've been trying to convince Emily that she needs more help around the house, but you know how independent our seniors can be." Mrs. Patterson nodded sympathetically. "My mother was the same way. It's hard for them to admit they need assistance." I felt heat rising in my cheeks, not from embarrassment but from anger. Jessica was performing for an audience, creating witnesses to my supposed decline and their devoted concern. She was building a public narrative that would support their conservatorship claim. "I'm managing just fine," I said, but Jessica had already reached up to get the tomato sauce herself. "Of course you are, Emily. We just worry about you being alone when these situations come up." On the drive home, Jessica brought up the incident again. "Emily, I hope you're starting to see why David and I are concerned. Simple tasks, like grocery shopping, are becoming difficult for you, and it's only going to get worse." "I've been shopping in that store for 20 years, I replied. "I know where everything is and how to get help if I need it." "But what if you fall trying to reach something? What if you have an episode like yesterday with your medications?" "Emily, we care about you too much to just stand by and watch you struggle." "An episode?" She was already reframing my fabricated medication confusion as a recurring problem, a pattern of decline that justified intervention. When we reached my house, Jessica helped me carry the groceries inside, making a show of handling all the heavy bags herself. Once everything was unpacked, she lingered in the kitchen, looking around with what appeared to be casual interest. "You know, Emily, this house really is getting too big for one person to maintain. When was the last time you used the upstairs bedrooms? I go up there sometimes to dust or organize closets. But with your arthritis, those stairs must be painful. And what if you fell? No one would hear you call for help." She was planting seeds, building the case that my home was becoming a danger rather than a sanctuary. Every conversation was designed to chip away at my confidence in my ability to live independently. After Jessica left, I immediately called Margaret to report on the morning's activities. "She's definitely building a public record of my supposed incompetence, and she's focusing heavily on the house being too big and dangerous for me. That suggests they're planning to move quickly on the conservatorship. If they can get legal control over your decisions, they can force the sale of your house without your consent. How much time do we have?" "Based on what you've told me about their timeline, probably not much. Emily, I think it's time to accelerate our own plans. Are you ready to stop acting and start fighting back?" The question sent adrenaline coursing through my veins. After weeks of playing the helpless victim, the thought of revealing my true capabilities was intoxicating. "More than ready." "Good. Because Monday morning, we're going to file some paperwork of our own. It's time to show David and Jessica that they picked the wrong target." That night, I had trouble sleeping, not because of arthritis pain or anxiety about the future, but because of excitement. For the first time since Edmund died, I felt like I was taking control of my life, instead of just reacting to what others wanted from me. I thought about the conversation I'd overheard in my driveway, about Jessica's casual cruelty and David's willing participation in it. They'd made the mistake of thinking that physical limitations equated to mental weakness, that age meant automatic vulnerability, that being a mother meant being exploitable. Tomorrow, they were going to start learning just how wrong they were. That old one was still alive, and she was about to remind them exactly what that meant. Monday morning arrived with the kind of crisp October air that made everything feel possible. I'd been awake since 5, not from insomnia but from anticipation. Today was the day I stopped pretending to be helpless and started proving just how capable I really was. Margaret had scheduled our appointment for 9 sharp, giving us plenty of time to file our legal documents before David and Jessica could make their move. I dressed carefully in my best navy suit, the one I'd worn to Edmund's funeral, and applied my makeup with steady hands that showed no trace of the tremor I'd been faking for weeks. The courthouse was busier than I'd expected for a Monday morning. Margaret met me at the information desk, carrying a thick folder that contained what she called our nuclear option. "Are you ready for this, Emily? Once we file these papers, there's no going back. David and Jessica will know you've been playing them, and they're going to be furious. I thought about Jessica's voice saying that old one is still alive, with such casual dismissal, about David's willingness to fabricate medical evidence to steal my independence. I've never been more ready for anything in my life. The first document we filed was a formal complaint with Adult Protective Services, detailing David and Jessica's plan to fraudulently obtain conservatorship and exploit my finances. Margaret had crafted it carefully, using legal language that made their scheme sound exactly like what it was: elder abuse. The second document was a restraining order request, asking the court to prevent David and Jessica from making any medical or financial decisions on my behalf without my explicit written consent. It also prohibited them from contacting my doctors or banks without my direct authorization. The third and most satisfying document was a formal request for an investigation into the mysterious Dr. Peterson, whom David had claimed supported their conservatorship case. Margaret had done some digging and discovered that while there was indeed a Dr. Peterson practicing in Riverside, he was a pediatric dermatologist who had never treated elderly patients and had certainly never evaluated me. "Emily," the clerk said as she processed our paperwork, "these are some serious allegations. Are you sure you want to proceed with all of this?" I looked at this young woman, probably in her 30s, and wondered if she could imagine what it felt like to discover that your own child saw you as nothing more than an inconvenient obstacle to their financial freedom. "Ma'am, I've never been more sure of anything in my 72 years. By noon, we'd completed all the legal filings and set the wheels of justice in motion. Margaret and I celebrated with lunch at a small cafe downtown, where she explained what would happen next. David and Jessica will be served with copies of all these documents within the next few days. They'll also be notified that there's now an official investigation into their activities. The restraining order should be approved by tomorrow, which means any attempt to proceed with their conservatorship plan will be blocked." "What about the fake Dr. Peterson reference?" Margaret smiled grimly. "That's where things get interesting. Claiming false medical support for a conservatorship case is a felony. If the investigation confirms that they fabricated that evidence, they could face criminal charges. The thought of David in handcuffs should have made me sad, but instead I felt a cold satisfaction. Actions had consequences, and my son was about to learn that lesson the hard way. I spent the rest of Monday afternoon at home, waiting. Margaret had warned me that David and Jessica might try to contact me as soon as they realized what was happening, and I wanted to be prepared for their reaction. The call came at 4:30. David's number appeared on my caller ID, and I let it ring 3 times before answering, wanting to seem like my usual confused self until the moment I chose to reveal the truth. "Hello? Mom, we need to talk. Right now." David's voice was tight with barely controlled anger. "Jessica and I are coming over. Is everything all right, dear? You sound upset. We'll discuss it when we get there. Don't go anywhere." The line went dead. I sat back in Edmund's chair and smiled. The fish had taken the bait. 20 minutes later, I heard the familiar sound of David's car pulling into my driveway, followed by the slam of 2 doors closing with more force than usual. I stayed seated in my chair, arranging my face into an expression of mild confusion and concern. They didn't knock. David used his key, which told me everything I needed to know about how they viewed my home and my privacy. They burst through the front door like stormtroopers, Jessica's face flushed with fury, and David's jaw set in a hard line. "Mom, what the hell do you think you're doing?" David's voice was louder than I'd ever heard it, all pretense of filial concern abandoned. I blinked at him with apparent surprise. "David? Language. What's gotten into you?" "Don't play dumb with us," Jessica snapped, waving a legal document in the air. "Adult Protective Services. A restraining order. What kind of game are you playing?" I tilted my head as if I didn't understand. "I'm sorry, dear, but I don't know what you're talking about. What restraining order?" David stepped closer, his face dark with rage. "The restraining order that prevents us from helping you with your medical and financial decisions. The complaint claiming we're trying to abuse you. The investigation into our supposed fraud." "Fraud?" I let confusion color my voice. "David, I'm completely lost. I haven't filed any complaints or restraining orders. Are you sure there hasn't been some mistake? Jessica threw the papers down on my coffee table. These have your signature on them, Emily. Your name is all over these documents. Don't lie to us. I leaned forward to examine the papers, squinting as if I were having trouble reading them. In reality, I was savoring every word of the legal language that was about to turn their world upside down. I don't understand. I never signed these papers. I don't even know what most of these words mean. I looked up at them with wide, innocent eyes. Who would file something like this in my name? Cut the act, Mom. David's voice was ice cold. We know you're not as confused as you've been pretending to be. And there it was. The admission I'd been waiting for. They'd known I was acting, which meant they'd been playing along with my supposed decline for their own purposes. Acting? I let hurt creep into my voice. David, you're scaring me. I haven't been acting. I've been struggling with some confusion lately, just like I told you. Bull. Jessica stepped forward, her face contorted with anger. Nobody accidentally files legal documents. Nobody accidentally requests investigations. You've been playing us this whole time. I stood up slowly, using my walking stick for support, and looked at both of them with what I hoped appeared to be growing alarm. I think you should both leave. You're upsetting me, and I don't understand what you're accusing me of. We're not going anywhere until you explain this, David said, gesturing at the papers. Do you have any idea what you've done? You've accused us of elder abuse, you've claimed we're trying to steal from you, you've destroyed our reputations. Your reputations, I repeated slowly. David, I would never do anything to hurt your reputation. You're my son. I love you. If you love me, then you'll call your lawyer and have all of this dismissed immediately. I blinked at him. What lawyer? I don't have a lawyer. Jessica made a sound of pure frustration. Margaret Bishop, Emily. The lawyer whose name is all over these documents. The woman who's been helping you orchestrate this whole charade. I gasped as if the name had just jogged my memory. Margaret? Oh my goodness, I did talk to Margaret a few weeks ago. She's an old friend, and I was feeling overwhelmed about some things, so I asked her for advice. What kind of advice? David demanded. Just general advice about protecting myself. She said something about how important it was for elderly people to have proper legal protections, especially if they were having cognitive difficulties. This was actually true. Margaret had said exactly that, though in a very different context than I was implying. Mom, did Margaret suggest filing these complaints against us? I wrinkled my forehead as if trying hard to remember. We talked about so many things. She asked a lot of questions about my family, about whether I felt safe, whether anyone was pressuring me to make decisions I wasn't comfortable with. And what did you tell her? Jessica's voice was sharp. I told her the truth, that you've both been wonderful to me, always looking out for my best interests. But I also mentioned that sometimes I feel confused about financial matters, and that David had offered to help me manage things. I paused, letting concern show on my face. Margaret seemed very worried about that. She said families sometimes take advantage of elderly people who are struggling with confusion, even when they don't mean to. She said it was important to have legal protections in place. David and Jessica exchanged glances, and I could see them recalculating their strategy. If they could convince a court that Margaret had manipulated a confused elderly woman into filing false complaints, they might be able to turn the situation to their advantage. Mom, it sounds like Margaret may have misunderstood the situation and filed these documents without fully explaining them to you. I nodded eagerly. That's possible. There were so many papers, and the legal language was very confusing. I signed things because Margaret said they would protect me, but I didn't really understand what they meant. We need to fix this immediately, Jessica said. Emily, you need to call Margaret and tell her you want to withdraw all these complaints. Tell her you were confused and didn't understand what you were signing. This was the moment I'd been waiting for. They were so focused on manipulating me that they'd completely exposed their real motives. They weren't concerned about my welfare or my confusion. They were concerned about the legal obstacles now standing between them and their plan to exploit me. I stood up straighter, setting my walking stick aside, and looked directly at both of them. You know what, David? I think I understand the situation perfectly now. Something in my voice made them both freeze. The confused, helpless tone was gone, replaced by steel. I understand that you and Jessica have been planning to have me declared incompetent, so you can steal my house and put me in a nursing home against my will. David's face went white. Mom, what are you talking about? I understand that you've been referring to me as that old one, who's still alive, as if my continued existence is some kind of personal inconvenience for you. Jessica took a step backward. You're confused. You're mixing things up. I understand that you've been documenting every moment of weakness, every sign of struggle, every mistake I've made, not out of love or concern, but as evidence to use against me in court. I walked around the coffee table, no longer using my walking stick, moving with the confidence of someone who is anything but frail or confused. I understand that you contacted a fake doctor to provide false medical evidence for your conservatorship case, which, by the way, is a felony. How do you know about Dr. Peterson? David asked, his voice barely a whisper. Because unlike what you both seem to think, there's nothing wrong with my mind. I've been watching you, listening to you, documenting every step of your plan to steal my life. I picked up the legal documents from the coffee table and held them up. These aren't the confused scribbles of a helpless old woman. These are the carefully planned actions of someone who refused to be victimized by her own family. The silence in the room was deafening. David and Jessica stood frozen, staring at me as if I'd transformed into someone they'd never seen before. The medication confusion? Deliberate. The financial mistakes? Fabricated. The grateful acceptance of your help? Pure performance. Jessica found her voice first. You've been lying to us? I've been protecting myself from you. There is a difference. David slumped into a chair, his head in his hands. Mom, you don't understand. We were genuinely worried about you. The arthritis, living alone, the isolation since Dad died. Were you worried when you stood in my driveway and called me a burden? Were you worried when you planned to forge medical documents? Were you worried when you calculated how much money you'd make from selling my house? His head snapped up. You heard that conversation? Every word. Including Jessica's charming comment about how tired she was of pretending to care about that old one who was still alive. Jessica's face crumpled. Whether from shame or anger, I couldn't tell. Emily, you're taking that completely out of context. Am I? Then please, explain the context in which referring to your husband's mother as that old one is appropriate. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Here's what's going to happen, I continued, my voice steady and clear. You're both going to leave my house right now. You're going to stop all contact with my doctors, my bank, and anyone else involved in my personal affairs. And you're going to abandon any plans to control my life or my property. And if we don't? David asked, defiance creeping back into his voice. Then you'll face the full consequences of the legal documents you're so upset about. Adult Protective Services will investigate every aspect of your financial dealings with me. The district attorney will examine your fake medical evidence, and a judge will decide whether your actions constitute criminal elder abuse. I walked to the front door and opened it wide. Your choice. David stood slowly, his face a mask of shock and defeat. Jessica followed him, clutching her purse like a shield. This isn't over, Emily, Jessica said as she reached the door. I smiled at her, and for the first time in months, it was completely genuine. You're absolutely right. It's not over. It's just beginning. And now you know exactly who you're dealing with. As they walked to their car, I called after them. Oh, and Jessica? That old one is still alive. And she's a lot smarter than you gave her credit for. I closed the door and leaned against it, my heart pounding with adrenaline and triumph. For the first time since Edmund died, I felt completely, utterly, magnificently alive. The phone started ringing almost immediately. I let it ring, knowing it would be David or Jessica trying to salvage their plan or their pride. I had nothing more to say to them today. Instead, I called Margaret. It's done. They know I've been playing them, and they know their scheme has been exposed. How did they react? About as well as you'd expect. Shock, anger, threats. Jessica seemed particularly upset about being outsmarted by, quote, that old one. Margaret laughed. I wish I could have seen their faces. Emily, you realize what you've accomplished today? You've not only protected yourself, but you've probably prevented them from trying this with some other vulnerable family member in the future. Good. No one should have to go through what they put me through. What's your next move? I looked around my living room, at the furniture Edmund and I had chosen together, at the family photos spanning decades of love and loss and growth, at the home they'd tried to steal from me. I'm going to call Sophia and invite her over for dinner, and then I'm going to start living my life on my own terms, without apology or permission from anyone. That old one was still alive, all right, and she was just getting started. The next 48 hours were a whirlwind of phone calls, legal meetings, and strategic planning. David and Jessica had gone silent after their confrontation at my house, but Margaret warned me this was likely the calm before the storm. People like your son and daughter-in-law don't give up easily when this much money is at stake, she explained during our Tuesday morning meeting. They'll regroup, probably consult their own attorney, and come back with a new strategy. I was ready for them. More than ready. The first phase of my counterattack involved securing every aspect of my independence they'd tried to undermine. I met with Dr. Martinez again and requested comprehensive documentation of my physical and mental health status. This time, I was completely honest about why I needed such detailed records. Doctor, my family has been questioning my competency to live independently. They've even claimed that some doctor named Peterson supports their concerns, though I've never been evaluated by anyone with that name. Dr. Martinez frowned deeply. Mrs. Morrison, I've been your physician for 3 years. If anyone had concerns about your mental capacity, they should have brought them to me first. And claiming medical opinions from doctors who haven't examined you is highly unethical, possibly illegal. Would you be willing to provide written testimony about my capabilities if this situation escalates to court? Absolutely. Your cognitive function is excellent for someone of any age, let alone 72. Anyone claiming otherwise would have to provide substantial evidence to contradict my professional assessment. Armed with Dr. Martinez's unequivocal support, I moved to the next phase of my plan. I needed to ensure that David and Jessica couldn't interfere with my financial independence, even if they somehow found a way around the restraining order. Linda Chan at the bank had been expecting my call. Mrs. Morrison, given what you've told me about your family situation, I'd recommend some additional security measures. We can set up a special flag on your accounts that requires multiple forms of identification for any changes, and we can create a separate emergency fund that only you can access. What about my existing joint account with David? I'd set up that account years ago for legitimate convenience, allowing him to help with occasional errands when my arthritis was particularly bad. We can convert that to a single-owner account immediately. Mr. Morrison will no longer have any access to your funds. The conversation reminded me of something I'd been putting off for too long. My will. The document currently left everything to David, with Sophia as a secondary beneficiary. Given recent events, that arrangement was no longer acceptable. Margaret had already prepared new estate planning documents. Emily, this revised will is much more specific about your intentions. The house goes into a trust for Sophia's education, with any remaining value transferring to her when she turns 25. Your other assets are divided between Sophia and several charities that support elderly rights. And David? Gets nothing. But Emily, are you absolutely certain about this? Once you sign these documents, David will be completely disinherited. I thought about my son as a little boy, bringing me dandelions from the yard and declaring them the most beautiful flowers in the world. Then I thought about the man who'd stood in my driveway and called me a burden to be disposed of. He made his choice when he decided I was worth more to him dead than alive. I'm just making mine. The new will was signed and notarized that afternoon, along with updated medical directives that specifically prohibited David and Jessica from making any healthcare decisions on my behalf. If something happened to me, those decisions would fall to Margaret, not to family members who saw my continued existence as an inconvenience. By Wednesday evening, I felt like I was living in a fortress of legal protections. But Margaret warned me that the real test was still coming. Emily, they're going to try one more time to gain control. Probably through emotional manipulation rather than legal channels. They'll bring Sophia into it, try to convince you that you're hurting your granddaughter by refusing their help. She was right. The call came Thursday morning while I was watering my roses, the same garden where this whole nightmare had started. "Mom, we need to talk." David's voice was different now. Calmer, more measured. The voice he used when he was trying to sell insurance policies to reluctant customers. "Sophia is very upset about the conflict between us. She doesn't understand why her family is fighting." "What has Sophia been told about our conflict?" "Just that there's been a misunderstanding about your care needs. She's worried about you, Mom. She thinks we don't love you anymore." The manipulation was transparent but effective. David knew that my love for Sophia was my greatest vulnerability, and he was weaponizing it. I'd be happy to talk to Sophia and reassure her that she's not responsible for adult problems. Actually, we were hoping the three of us could meet, you, me, and Jessica. Without lawyers, without legal documents. Just family, trying to work things out for Sophia's sake. I almost laughed at the audacity. They wanted to meet without the legal protections that were preventing them from manipulating me, framing it as a gesture of good faith when it was actually a last-ditch attempt to regain control. "Where did you have in mind for this meeting?" "Your house would be best. Neutral territory, familiar environment. Saturday afternoon, maybe around 2 o'clock. Neutral territory. My own home, where they'd planned my future without my consent, where they'd called me a burden, where they'd calculated the value of my life in dollars and cents." "Saturday at 2 sounds fine," I agreed. After I hung up, I immediately called Margaret. "They want a family meeting at my house Saturday afternoon. No lawyers, just the three of us talking things out." "Emily, that's obviously a trap. They're hoping to catch you off guard, maybe record you saying something that contradicts your legal claims. I know exactly what it is. That's why I'm going to be ready for them." Margaret and I spent Friday preparing for what we both knew would be the final confrontation. She helped me organize all my evidence, all my documentation, all the proof of David and Jessica's scheme. But more importantly, she helped me prepare emotionally for what I was about to do. "Emily, when you expose everything you know tomorrow, you're going to be ending your relationship with your son. Are you prepared for that?" I thought about the question seriously. David wasn't just my son. He was my only child, the person who carried Edmund's genes and my hopes for the future. Cutting him out of my life meant accepting that my family line would effectively end with me, at least in terms of meaningful relationships. "Margaret, I lost my son the day he decided I was worth more to him as a corpse than as a mother. Tomorrow I'm just making that loss official." Saturday arrived gray and drizzly, fitting weather for what felt like a funeral. I dressed carefully in a simple black dress, applied my makeup with steady hands, and arranged my evidence in neat piles on the dining room table. At exactly 2 o'clock, David's car pulled into my driveway. Through the window, I watched him and Jessica sit in the car for several minutes, clearly steeling themselves for this conversation. When they finally approached the front door, their faces were masks of determined concern. I let them knock rather than meeting them at the door as I usually did. When I answered, I was using my walking stick again, playing the part of the frail elderly woman they expected to see. "Mom," David smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with us." I led them to the living room, moving slowly and deliberately. "I hope we can clear up this misunderstanding. I hate the thought of Sophia being caught in the middle of adult problems." "That's exactly why we're here," Jessica said, settling into the couch with her purse clutched tightly in her lap. "Emily, we think there's been a terrible miscommunication about our intentions." "Oh?" I sat down in my chair, arranging my walking stick within easy reach. David leaned forward earnestly. "Mom, when we talked about assisted living options, it was never about forcing you to do anything. We were just exploring possibilities, trying to be prepared for the future." "And the conservatorship paperwork?" "Research," Jessica said quickly. "Just research into what legal options might be available if your health declined significantly. We never intended to actually file anything without discussing it with you first. The lies flowed so smoothly I almost admired their skill. Almost. What about Dr. Peterson's medical opinion supporting your conservatorship case? David's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. That was a misunderstanding. We consulted with Dr. Peterson about elderly care options in general, not about your specific situation. I see. And the money you've been taking from my bank accounts? Helping you manage your finances, with your permission. You signed the power of attorney documents yourself. I nodded as if I believed them, letting hope creep into my voice. So this was all just a series of misunderstandings? You're not actually trying to have me declared incompetent? Of course not, David said, relief evident in his voice. Mom, we love you. We'd never do anything to hurt you. And you're not planning to sell my house and put me in a nursing home against my will? Never, Jessica chimed in. Your home is important to you. We understand that. I stood up slowly, using my walking stick for support, and looked at both of them with what I hoped appeared to be profound relief. I'm so glad we cleared this up. I was beginning to think my own family was conspiring against me. They both relaxed visibly, thinking they'd successfully manipulated me back into compliance. Now then, I continued, setting my walking stick aside and straightening to my full height, let's discuss the real reason you're here. The change in my posture and voice made them both freeze. You're here because your scheme has been exposed, and you're trying to salvage what you can from the wreckage. You're here because you need me to withdraw my legal complaints so you can avoid criminal charges. You're here because for the first time in this whole mess, you're the ones who are powerless. David's face went ashen. Mom, what are you doing? What I should have done months ago. I walked to the dining room and returned with the stacks of evidence I'd prepared. I'm showing you exactly how much I know about your plan to destroy my life. I spread the bank statements across the coffee table. Unauthorized withdrawals totaling $37,000 over 18 months. Each one small enough to avoid triggering automatic alerts, but substantial enough to drain my savings systematically. Jessica's hands flew to her mouth. Forged power of attorney documents with signatures that don't match my handwriting. I had them analyzed by a forensic specialist Margaret recommended. I added the medical records to the pile. Documentation proving that I've never been evaluated by anyone named Dr. Peterson, despite your claims that he supported your conservatorship case. David stood up abruptly. Where did you get all this? From the same sources you thought you could manipulate. My bank, my doctors, my legal advisors. The difference is, I asked them to help me protect myself, instead of asking them to help me exploit someone else. I walked to the window overlooking the driveway, where I'd first overheard their plotting. And then there's the recorded conversation where you called me a burden and discussed how much money you'd make from selling my house after having me committed. This was a bluff. I hadn't actually recorded that conversation. But their faces told me I'd hit the target dead center. You've been recording us, Jessica whispered. I've been protecting myself from you. Every conversation, every visit, every attempt to manipulate my medical care or my finances. All documented, all verified, all ready to be presented in court if necessary. I turned back to face them, and for the first time in months, I felt completely in control of my own life. Here's what's going to happen now. You're going to return every penny you stole from my accounts. You're going to cease all contact with my medical providers and financial institutions, and you're going to accept that your plan to exploit me has failed completely. And if we refuse? David asked, though his voice lacked any real defiance. I smiled, and it felt like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Then you'll discover just how seriously the state of California takes elder abuse cases, especially cases involving financial fraud and forged medical evidence. The silence stretched between us like a chasm that could never be bridged. Finally, Jessica spoke, her voice small and defeated. What about Sophia? What happens to our family? Your daughter will always be welcome in my home and in my life. As for our family, you destroyed that when you decided I was worth more to you as an inheritance than as a person. David looked around the living room as if seeing it for the first time. Mom, this house, it's not just about the money, it's our family history. Your family history, I corrected. My family history involves love, respect, and taking care of each other. Your history involves exploitation and betrayal. I walked to the front door and opened it wide. You have 72 hours to return my money and remove yourselves from all my personal accounts. After that, every legal protection I've put in place becomes permanent and irreversible. They gathered their things in stunned silence and walked toward the door. David paused at the threshold. Mom, I'm sorry. I know you probably don't believe that, but I am truly sorry. I looked at this man who'd once been my precious little boy, who'd grown into someone I no longer recognized. I believe you're sorry, David, but you're sorry you got caught, not sorry for what you planned to do. And that's the difference between regret and redemption. As their car disappeared down the street, I closed the door and leaned against it, feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Complete, total, absolute victory. That old one was still alive, and she just reminded them exactly what that meant. 6 months later, I stood in my garden watching Sophia help me plant new rose bushes for the spring season. The arthritis was still there, still causing pain on difficult days, but it no longer defined what I could or couldn't do with my life. Grandma, are you sure you want to plant this many? Sophia asked, wiping dirt from her hands on the old gardening apron I'd given her. This is going to be a lot of work to maintain. I smiled, thinking about how much had changed since that gray October day when I'd finally stood up to her parents. Sweetheart, I've got nothing but time now, and these roses are going to be beautiful. David and Jessica had returned the stolen money within 48 hours of our final confrontation, along with written agreements to cease all interference in my personal affairs. They'd also quietly dropped any mention of conservatorship or assisted living, no doubt after consulting with their own attorney and learning about the criminal penalties for elder abuse. The relationship with my son was effectively over. We exchanged brief, polite conversations when he picked up or dropped off Sophia for her visits, but the warmth and trust were gone forever. Some bridges, once burned, simply couldn't be rebuilt. Dad asked me to tell you something, Sophia said carefully, not looking up from the soil she was preparing. He wanted you to know he's been going to counseling. Something about dealing with financial stress and family relationships. I considered this information while I positioned a new rose bush in its hole. That's good, honey. Everyone can benefit from professional help when they're struggling with difficult emotions. Do you think you'll ever forgive him? The question I'd been dreading finally came. Sophia was 14 now, old enough to understand that her family had fractured in ways that couldn't be easily repaired. Forgiveness is complicated, sweetheart. I've forgiven your father for being weak and making terrible choices. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting what happened or pretending it didn't matter. So you'll never be a family again? I set down my trowel and looked at this remarkable young woman who'd become my anchor in the storm. We'll always be family, Sophia. You and I will always have each other. As for your parents and me, well, sometimes love isn't enough to overcome betrayal. The house felt different now, lighter somehow. I'd had new locks installed and updated my security system. More importantly, I'd reclaimed every room, every corner, every memory that David and Jessica had tried to steal from me. Margaret visited regularly, both as a friend and as my attorney. She'd been impressed by how thoroughly I'd protected myself, and had started referring other elderly clients who needed help standing up to exploitative family members. Emily, you've become something of a legend in legal circles, she'd told me recently. There's actually a case study being written about your situation for law schools. You're teaching future attorneys how elderly people can protect themselves from financial abuse. The thought of helping others in similar situations gave me a sense of purpose I hadn't felt since Edmund died. I'd started volunteering with a local organization that provided legal education to seniors, sharing my story and helping others recognize the warning signs of family exploitation. My health had improved dramatically once I stopped pretending to be helpless. The arthritis was manageable with proper medication and regular exercise. My mind was sharper than it had been in years. My independence was complete and legally protected. Most importantly, I'd learned something valuable about my own strength. For too long after Edmund's death, I'd defined myself by my limitations rather than my capabilities. David and Jessica's betrayal, as painful as it had been, had forced me to rediscover who I really was. Grandma, Sophia said as we finished planting the last rose bush. I'm proud of you. For fighting back, for protecting yourself, for showing everyone that being older doesn't mean being helpless. I hugged my granddaughter close, breathing in the scent of fresh earth and new possibilities. Thank you, sweetheart. That means everything to me. As the sun set over Riverside, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, I looked at the garden Edmund and I had created together, now expanded with new growth and fresh beauty. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new reasons to be grateful for each day I was given. That old one was still alive, and she intended to make every remaining day count. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.